Hey there, so there's nothing quite so dangerous as an ideologue. When you look at Bleeding Cool, for example, and you look at people like Rich Johnston, look at what they're willing to do to other people. They like to platform, but not only platform because of ideology, but they also like to deplatform because of the same thing. You vote wrong, well, they'll find a reason to go out and to harm you. If you vote the right way, it doesn't matter exactly what you do. Not only that, in my personal opinion, Rich Johnston wants to be connected to the comic book industry. He has gone out and had a little taste of success within that. You know, he's actually been hosted in a couple of anthologies. He can say in a byline, he was actually listed with Mike Mignola. Now, his story had nothing to do with it in a Dark Horse Presents, but still, when you see that, it's got to leave you wanting more. Still, when you're reaching out and you're grasping at it these days, the way that you get into the industry is not talent. The way that you connect to it is through ideology. And there's no more dangerous ideologues than you see with Bleeding Cool. Now, when we're talking about what they do, I mean, look at people like John Malin. John Malin decided to speak out about the SJW superhero. He actually did so in a comment, and he talked about ideology within that. He said that the ideology that SJWs espouse are more akin to Hitler's Germany than anything within that. And he talked about weaponizing hatred. He talked about ideologues rising and so on. Now, how does an ideologue counter that? Well, they try to connect him to the alt-right. How did they do that? Well, John Malin, he went out and drew a picture that said Shell Beach on it in one comic book. Why did he do that? Because he liked Dark City, which is a movie that I actually think is a very good one, but Rich Johnston says is a wider version of The Matrix. Well, in The Matrix, you know, people talk about red pilling, and the alt-right, according to Rich Johnston, they talk about red pilling too. So this, since it was in here, and it's a wider version of The Matrix in Dark City, well, you know, you have a dog whistle confirmed. That was literally the logic in that. I mean, when you look at that, imagine going out and imagine that thrown out at somebody. The intent of that was to destroy someone's career. And you know what? John Malin was featured on sites like Yes, You're Racist, you know, on Twitter, wherein they have 500,000 followers, and they were talking about his viewpoint, and they were throwing it in with viewpoints that espouse that not only was he dog whistling to the alt-right, but yeah, he's racist. That's the kind of people that you run into. You've also seen the stuff with Ethan Van Sciver, and I love how Rich Johnston says, well, I put out an article that said he's not a Nazi, so you know, you can see that I'm not really a bad guy. The only problem with that is, even in that article, the one positive, if you want to call it that, among the many, many negative, he even goes after him within that. He talks about his signature, for example, and how that harkens to heavy metal. And heavy metal, well, you know how that actually goes in and talks about that Nazi ideology. You know, they love those symbols. So really, what does that mean? I mean, you can see how twisted that thought process is. This guy, too, he featured people over and over that have weaponized their ideology to try to deplatform him, that tried to connect him to Charlottesville. I mean, can you imagine that? Can you imagine, because you sketched something 10 years ago that was a joke, you actually put Space Hitler on the front, you make a joke about that, you also make one that harkens back to communism, and the people, they decide to omit the one about communism. 10 years later, they like to put them up there, and they like to talk about you being a Nazi. And well, places like Bleeding Cool, they actually feature those people over and over again. You know, Tim Doyle is a dangerous person within this stuff too. This person does not have connection within comic book industry, but comic books as a community, with gatekeepers associated in the comic book media through comic book pros and on. That person is dangerous. That person has gone after many people, including the Breitweisers we'll see mentioned here. And of course, he has been connected to Rich Johnston many a time. He loves going to him for quotes, but he loves doing that. He loves going to him, and he loves going back to this same group of people over and over again, because they They profess the same ideas that he does. It's just like the people that he won't talk about. For example, he talked about Alex DeCampi in comments one time. He and I had an exchange wherein I mentioned the alt-right troll thread, which he had not seen, and I talked about the racism within blackface trolls, taking away agency from people because they don't have enough followers or they don't have the right type of avatar. And he said, well, I haven't seen it, but knowing Alex DeCampi, you're talking bollocks. Why? Because he already knows, and because he wants something from that too, in my opinion. He also talks about how he's not a journalist, and you really have to think about why you would say that. That's because he thinks he can't be held to any type of standard. He can go out, slander people repeatedly, and nothing will transpire. Avatar Press that underwrites Bleeding Cool, they've never done anything about it. People have never sued, so why should they bother? Why should he care? They're making money on clickbait. I think people should go out and start contacting advertisers. In fact, I would really welcome people to give me a list of advertisers. I would definitely welcome the opportunity to throw that out there and to challenge this stuff. Now, when I look at something that they did in the past, the Breitweisers, we've talked about them. We've talked about Rich Johnston, and we've talked about all of these other people getting together and trying to destroy their career. 2 years of it. And there has been no video that has ever gone through and compiled everything. Even for myself, some of the names that were associated with that harassment, I was careful not to throw them all in there, because if I threw them all in there, I was afraid of the blowback, because there were so many big people out there that decided to turn on people because they voted the wrong way, or because one of them voted the wrong way and the other there, well, they decided to loop them in for kicks. See, if you haven't heard about what happened with that, I have plenty of videos on this, but essentially Mitch Breitweiser put out something he thought would be funny. He thought he would have a little bit of fun with. He put out a picture of Donald Trump holding a sword with a halo over him, saying that he hopes that the new president-elect will do well for all Americans. Such a terrible thought crime. But you know what? It opened the door for harassment, and Bleeding Cool, they jumped right on in, and they made sure everybody knew it, and they didn't close the door on one article. They did associated articles wherein they constantly reminded people that those people, they vote wrong. They are the wrong thinkers. You have to go out, and you have to do something about that. And when they pointed their finger, you know what? The industry listened. When you look at the options going forward now, the Breitweisers talk about things being positive. But in the past, if you listen to interviews, you can hear when they're talking about it. They don't want to slander or defame people either. They want to focus forward and focus on the positive. But we cannot forget this stuff. And Rich Johnston, well, he's a weasel. Look at this post here, which I'm working toward. Bleeding Cool hosted a hate campaign against Mitch Breitweiser and Ethan Van Sciver. If you look closely, Tim Doyle is always in the vicinity of this mess. Why does Rich Johnston and Avatar Press condone this? And that's because in this article here, Bounding Into Comics is being attacked. These people are trying to deplatform them because they actually take their tweets and they report on them the way they are. They don't have to build something like a Rich Johnston would, wherein he pretends that people love and adore him. Look at his answer here. He throws up something with Mitch Breitweiser saying, fairly written, thank you, Rich Johnston and Bleeding Cool. I could use a hug or two. You can imagine being put into this maelstrom and hoping that it will end, hoping that these people will not continue to dogpile your career. But of course they did that. And you see Elizabeth Breitweiser talking about it. We were libeled and I had my career threatened after you pulled out that belittling article, Rich. You knew what you were doing and the kind of negative attention those articles would bring. You played a big part in my life, making my life a living hell these past 2 years. Now, of course, Rich Rich Johnston comes in and says, I wasn't involved in the article at all. No, you just have one of the higher positions there. You actually have control over what people put out. You actually have say within that. You've written hit piece after hit piece showcasing the way forward, but you have nothing to do with that. The culture of Bleeding Cool itself is broken. There is something just broken inside of that where you think that this is acceptable. But continuing here, the only involvement I had was when Mitch thanked me for it, which I probably should have corrected. But this is the first I've heard anything negative regarding it. People have brought this up over and over again, but this guy always goes out and says, I didn't know anything about it. I'm not to blame. If I did, I would have done something about it. But, you can't hold me accountable because he knows what he's gotten involved in. Also, he probably understands from a legal standpoint that he could be held accountable for some of this stuff. I mean, when you go out and you try to use your pulpit to damage and to basically disparage the way he does, well, you can imagine what kind of blowback in a court of law that could carry. But here's Edwin Boyette commenting on it. I'm going to play his comment in full.
It's actually a useful phrasing. So assuming no malevolence on your part.
I love that laugh there.
And I know you say that you're not a reporter.
Of course not.
I don't know exactly what you consider yourself to be.
Hobbyist, character assassin.
If this is the first that you had heard that the Breitweisers had experienced any distress over all this, you're not particularly good at whatever it is you actually do. Which is
body slam.
Probably compelling evidence for pretty much no one to ever go to Bleeding Cool again. So thank you for that.
Oh, that's great.
It.
That is good. I love how Edwin actually comes in and talks about stuff. He's right on with that, too. I would tell you to go read the comments section of the Bleeding Cool article that mentioned Mitch to get a taste of what we went through. But it appears that all original comments have been scrubbed. That's interesting. That is also a Bleeding Cool tactic. They love to go in and they love to scrub history because they try to do away with the liability within that. You see people that are commenting on this too. They're basically calling him a liar and on. But you can see how this spin goes because these people there, they couldn't have been the victims of something. Rich Johnston, he's not accountable in any way. When he goes out, like I said, he doesn't even call himself a journalist because that would evoke the idea of having some type of journalistic integrity, and well, no, we can't have that. Bleeding Cool is a clickbait site, but beyond that, it sets it around with people that are influencers within the industry because some of them have positions of prominence. But within industry, instead of having someone like, say, a Mitch Breitweiser that should be jumping from thing to thing, bringing you quality there, they have people out that are evoking community, not industry. And within community, you build walls, you put up gates, and you only let your friends in. Merit, it doesn't matter. Rich Johnston is part of that. That's why they don't like bounding into comics. That's why these people, they don't like the Breitweisers and on, because they step out of that. They step out and they talk about what's there, because we're talking about establishing meritocracy again. We're talking about holding people accountable for what they have done within this industry, how they have made it not only a terrible place to work and also a terrible place to actually back, but it's one that is in decline now. 6 quarters of decline. They don't think that the culture they've brought to this is part of the issue either. Well, I have to say that I hope that places like Bleeding Cool, as things take a downturn, they're connected to all of this mess. So I hope that they feel the brunt of it. As industry declines and more people, they walk away. But anyhow, tell me what you think about this stuff. I mean, when you see Rich Johnston spinning, I'm sure nobody's surprised, but, it gets old. It really gets old that there is no accountability within this. Avatar Press, they won't do anything. I mean, Rich Johnston, he lives in an area where you can't lead a harassment campaign, where you wouldn't be able to go out and maliciously attack people's livelihoods like this. And yet, And yet he somehow gets away with this over and over and over again. He has been out there and is one of the most reviled people, even on the other side, as he tries to cozy up to ideologues. He likes to say, too, that he's reviled by both sides. And it's funny when you look at the why. You know, on the leftist side there, these people hate him because he adds like a diversity in comics to a top 100 most influential people. On the other side of that, when you're talking about, well, anyone else pretty much from centrist on, and really, you know, anyone really in that has half a brain, I mean, you see those people are bothered by the fact that you see campaigns that are aimed at not only defaming, but destroying careers. That's why that side hates them. Now, you tell me, what's worse within that? Adding somebody to something where they think it should be deplatformed, or trying to cost people jobs because you yourself are trying to deplatform? For me, that's one of the reasons I back Red Rooster, because I want to send a message. I want to say that this guy, he does not speak for anyone. He may speak, he may preach the gospel of the lowly. He may go out and try to drive people low, but it's not going to work. We, the consumer, we have power. Not this antiquated system where we have people out there trying to promote a message that doesn't reflect industry, or where we have pros that have gone out and demean and defame other pros if they speak out a certain way, or consumers are on. We have the power within this stuff. But anyhow, when you look at this stuff, like I said, tell me what you think about it. Thank you.